Everyone says holding two strands together doubles your yarn cost, but that's not true. And I can prove it. I ran the numbers, and the results were a lot more surprising than just double the yarn, double the cost. So today we're breaking down the two strands of yarn trend, where it came from, what it actually costs, and whether it's worth the hype. Holding two strands of yarn together isn't new. Before PetiteKnit came on the scene, there were designers using two strands together for lots of different reasons. Stephen West designed this chunky blanket which stash busts using lots of different yarns from your collection to create a really squishy, comfy texture in the finished project. This slipper pattern uses two strands held together to create a more structured fabric than you would otherwise have. This pattern uses two strands together to create an ombre effect, which was extremely popular at the time of its publication. Knitting two strands together was a popular technique when a designer was creating a pattern for a yarn brand, because they could make a pattern that was flexible enough to work for multiple bases of that yarn. Two strands of this one strand of that one, either one will work. I also love a really creative application of two strands together, like the diaphanous sweater by Jessie Maid, where two strands together create an opaque torso, but one strand creates a transparent sleeve. It's just a really cool and creative way to use that technique. In the past, designers used two strands of yarn together, but it was usually for a creative purpose, for squish, for structure, for a specific design element like ombre. It was around, but it wasn't everywhere. Fast forward to the rise of PetiteKnit. She didn't invent the technique, but she definitely made it more popular. A strand of fingering, a strand of mohair, a pinch of minimalist Scandi design, and you've got yourself a PetiteKnit sweater. Her sweater patterns almost always involve holding a strand of fingering with a strand of mohair, and the resulting drape and texture of the fabric she creates is iconic and unmistakable. But as PetiteKnit hit home run after home run with her sweater patterns, knitters started to get frustrated. Why am I paying for twice the yarn to knit one sweater? But the truth behind the cost of a two-stranded yarn sweater isn't so cut and dry. So I did some math, some real examples from real-life sweaters, and calculated exactly how much each of them cost so we could break it down together and really see the truth behind the cost of a single strand versus a double strand of yarn sweater. But before we dig into the math, let's talk about wool showing up somewhere unexpected: your mattress. If you're a knitter, you already know the magical properties of wool. It's temperature regulating, moisture wicking, naturally antimicrobial, it's totally natural. And I've been trying to incorporate more wool into my wardrobe beside my hand knit sweaters. So base layers, I've even gotten a wool sleep sack for my son, but I hadn't considered the place that I spend a third of my time, my bed. So when Birch reached out to me about sponsoring this video, my mind was blown. I didn't even realize that you could put wool into a mattress, but the more I thought about it, it makes total sense. I want my mattress to be as healthy and comfortable as possible. And if I'm already making efforts to incorporate wool into all of these other elements of my life, why not the place that I truly spend a third of my day? With Birch, I get the comfort and breathability of my handmade sweaters in my mattress. It's incredible. Birch mattresses are made with natural and organic materials like wool, cotton, and latex. They are 100% fiberglass free, and you won't find any of the polyurethane or off-gassing or forever chemicals that you find in conventional mattresses. I was shocked when I started comparing Birch materials with conventional mattress materials. Since switching to Birch, my sleep has been noticeably better. We got the Birch Luxe, and it is the perfect blend of softness and support. My back feels amazing when I wake up in the morning, and I sleep even easier knowing that my mattress is made of natural and organic materials. Birch was willing to offer a discount to my viewers of 27% off with the code BirchPartner27. Just go to birchliving.com and type that code in, and you should be able to get a special Labor Day discount on your order. And by the way, if back to school season means that you're upgrading your kids into a different sleep system, like my toddler is transitioning into a big boy bed, and you're looking for a safe and sustainable choice, you may want to look into the Birch Kids Natural Mattress. That's what we're using. Couldn't feel better about it. Thank you again to Birch for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to the math. So does holding yarn double actually cost you double? The short answer is no, but let me show you why. We're going to look at the no frills sweater as our example, and if you were to knit this sweater as recommended by PetiteKnit, the yarn required would cost you $144. But that doesn't mean you have to spend $144 on yarn. And by the way, this is a sweater that's holding a strand of mohair with a strand of fingering weight yarn. So two strands together, $144. Now, if I were to just open up Ravelry and look through the project page and try to get a sense of what people knit with, it would be a little bit hard to compare. Some people knit different sizes than others. Some people have different gauge than others. The best thing to do would be to find one knitter who had knit the same sweater with different yarn many different times to control as many variables as possible and really make a fair comparison. So I did. Laura Knits has knit the No Frills sweater by PetiteKnit an impressive 7 times. And each time she used a different yarn, sometimes 2 strands, sometimes 1. So let's take a look at Laura Knits Sweaters and see the cost breakdown of everything she knit. And thank you, Laura, for letting us use you as an example in this video. In Laura's no-frills sweater journey, she created 3 sweaters holding 2 strands together and 4 sweaters holding 1 strand. Let's break it down. For the 3 sweaters that Laura knit with 2 strands held together, she spent $168, $114, and then for this last one, it's got a lot of handspun in it, so I can't really calculate it, but what we can do is admire it. Like, Laura, you're impressive. That's incredible. Beautiful sweater. Other 4 sweaters come in at $165, $132, $126, and $157. So when we look at the spread of these 7 sweaters, there isn't a clear divide. Like, 2 strands is expensive, 1 strand is less expensive. In fact, the most expensive and least expensive sweaters on this spread are both with 2 strands held together, and everything in the middle was 1 strand alone. But let's look at another example just to be fair. PetiteKnit's Anker sweater calling for 1 strand of fingering and 1 strand of mohair. If you were to knit it with the suggested yarn, it would cost about $157. But this knitter held 2 strands of Holst yarn together for a total cost of $61.50. This one uses 1 strand of Madelinetosh DK for an estimated cost of $160. And this one modified the pattern to use a single strand of sock weight yarn for about $160. And if you were really on a budget, you could use something like Lion Brand Woolies and make the whole sweater for $42. Or if you were dedicated to the 2 strands together, you could use 2 strands of drops for $91. These prices represent a huge spread, and it starts to reveal the truth that holding 2 strands together isn't a definite doubling of your cost. In fact, the fiber that you choose to knit with is far more of a predictor of the cost than how many strands you hold together. Okay, so holding 2 strands together isn't more expensive, then why are knitters so turned off by patterns that require 2 strands together? Like, I've heard of knitters who just click out of a pattern immediately if it calls for 2 strands of yarn. For one, the feel. A lot of knitters just don't like working with mohair because it can be itchy, it doesn't feel so great close to the skin depending on how sensitive your skin is, and the process of knitting it doesn't feel great either. It can get up in your nose while you're trying to knit, it can bother your hands, and holding 2 strands together is so annoying. Not to make it personal. Not to make it personal, holding 2 strands together can be more fiddly than knitting with just 1. And yes, there are solutions, yarn bags that help you keep the 2 separate, but some people wind both together into a ball, but have you ever tried to unravel those? It's a nightmare. But the third and the biggest reason why knitters feel so fatigued with the 2 strands together trend is just that it is everywhere. It feels like today every single sweater, especially the ones that look a little bit more wearable and trendy, are holding a strand of fingering together with a strand of mohair. Even in places where it doesn't fully make sense, like a garment that's cabled or lace or heavily patterned, where that halo of the mohair will actually obscure some of the design of the fabric. Like, why are you doing that? It kind of seems like it's only because it's trendy or because holding a strand of mohair alongside a main strand has become a signal that this is a trendy, cool pattern, and it's following in PetiteKnit's footsteps. I have a lot of thoughts about why so many sweater patterns today are starting to look the same, and I made a whole video about it, so I'll link it here if you missed it and you want to check it out. Holding 2 strands together is very polarizing. Some people love it, some people hate it, regardless of how you feel about it. Let's talk about how to manage it if you want to knit a 2 strand together sweater with only 1 strand. Did you know that there is a handy cheat sheet for when you want to substitute 1 strand of yarn instead of 2? It goes a little something like this. 2 strands of lace weight equal a fingering, 2 strands of fingering equal a DK, 2 strands of DK equal an Aran, 2 strands of sport equal a worsted, 2 strands of worsted equal a bulky. So if you ever want to knit a sweater out of 1 strand of yarn instead of 2, you can just look at that chart and find the equivalent single strand to match the 2 strands called for in the pattern and sub it out. No problem. But how much yardage should you buy? Well, that's the question. And to be honest with you, it's going to wind up being an educated guess. Like, we're guesstimating here, but it's a pretty fair guesstimate. Here's how I do it. To start, I always check out the yardage that's recommended in the original pattern. So if it calls for 1,600 yards of fingering held double, so that's double 1,600, 1,600 yards of fingering held double, I'm gonna go ahead and buy 1,600 yards of DK for my substitution yarn. I don't stop there, I always buy an extra skein just to be sure. But if I want to check my work, I go ahead and look at the weight of yarn recommended versus the weight of yarn I'm buying. And almost every ball band will give you the yardage, the meterage, and the weight in grams for the yarn contained in that ball. The weight of a fingering weight sweater held double, and the weight of a DK weight sweater, making that equivalent pattern, should weigh approximately the same amount. So I usually look at the yardage to indicate how much I should buy in the heavier weight yarn, and then I check the weight just to make sure I have enough to knit that sweater. I understand that yarn substitution can feel scary, and the math involved can kind of put people off from trying to knit a sweater with a different yarn that's recommended. But in this case, if you are not going to even attempt a sweater because the yarn's held double, I recommend you give it a try. Use the yarn conversion chart, double check your work with the yarn's weight, buy an extra skein or two just to be sure. If you don't end up using it, you can make a matching hat. It would be really cute. Give it a try. Substituting yarn can open up a whole new world of patterns for you. I know, I could go on about this forever. I did already. There's a video here, I'll link it. If you missed my video about yarn substitution, I recommend you check it out. But the question remains, why are PetiteKnit sweaters so expensive if it's not because she's holding 2 strands double? And the answer is, PetiteKnit sweaters are so expensive because she recommends expensive yarn. And if you're knitting the pattern out of the exact yarn she recommends, it's gonna cost a pretty penny. Just as an example, let's take a look at 2 of PetiteKnit's rare sweaters that don't require 2 strands of yarn held together, the Louvre sweater and the Storm sweater. Both of them require about the same yardage, and for me to knit either of them in my size would cost me about $150. But I could definitely make them more cheaply if I just subbed it out. They're only prohibitively expensive if you follow the recommended yarn. So is knitting with 2 strands together making us all broke? The answer is no. It depends more on what fiber you choose to knit with. And sure, you could splurge and go luxury on a fancy mohair fiber, but you could also go budget and knit something for a fraction of the cost. It's kind of up to you and what fiber you choose to use. The most important factor is whether you are willing to use the substitution chart and figure out what yarn works best for you. Even though mohair sweaters have been called timeless, they were very popular in the 80s, and we see how that all went. So we'll see how long this trend is here to stick around. As for you, I'm curious to know, are you a 2 strands together kind of knitter, or are you a 1 strand subber? Let me know in the comments. As always, it was wonderful to talk about knitting with you today, and I can't wait to see you in the next one. Bye.